8 months have passed since the beginning of the World Championship, and in the glow of fireworks on Jazz Island, the 2023 Formula One season has come to an end. The season of thrills and broken records concluded as the checkered flag fell at the Jazz Marina circuit. A race that defined the final struggles of this 2023 championship, both for the drivers and the various teams. Being an end to the season, for us it is time to get down to work with a summary of the final round of the Formula One World Championship, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, on this occasion to close the competitive year in the category. We wouldn't have any surprises prior to the start of the Grand Prix. At this point, Mercedes and Ferrari were battling for the runner-up spot in the Constructors' Championship, McLaren and Aston Martin, the 4th position in this championship, and Williams and AlphaTauri, the 7th place, which were precisely the battles that would have all our attention at this moment. Is on Saturday, not to break the overwhelming tradition of the season, Max Verstappen secured another pole position, but Charles Leclerc would start second and Oscar Piastri third. And precisely these two drivers would be looking to help their respective teams in their different struggles of this championship. But would obviously be on Sunday when all these battles would come to life in the final dance of 2023 before we all take a rest. This left the question of whether Max would secure another victory, Ferrari would overcome Mercedes, Aston Martin would beat McLaren, and if Williams could maintain its position in the standings. And once the cars would line up on the starting grid, the traffic lights would go out, and thus the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix would begin. Leclerc's start was very good, but he didn't have enough space to slot his car past Max Verstappen at turn 1. With more room, Verstappen successfully defended his first position. However, Norris managed to gain a position by overtaking George Russell, and Hamilton moved up from 11th to 9th, although he went wide at turn 1 and eventually got overtaken by Checo Perez, dropping back to 10th. Later, in that first lap, Leclerc positioned himself for an attack against Verstappen. In turn 6, he cautiously attempted, and before the hairpin, he tried again timidly, unable to snatch the lead from the Dutchman. He cannot be blamed for not being overly aggressive, considering the pace Max Verstappen had. During some laps following the start of the race, the top 3 drivers were closely matched in pace. But after that, Max quickly pulled away from Charles Leclerc, taking him out of the Double S range, and let's face it, he opened up a 10-second gap to the rest, comfortably winning the race. While others were battling fiercely, he was already waiting on the podium, uncorking the champagne or sparkling wine, whatever they drink in Abu Dhabi. So the battle shifted behind. Norris quickly began to showcase good pace, and by lap 4 he overtook his teammate, taking 3rd place and aiming for a podium finish. Piastri, on the other hand, started to lose pace a bit, so after a few laps, he was also overtaken by Russell. But he managed to defend against him on some occasions, only to be defeated on the 3rd attempt by the British driver, who advanced to 4th place, needing to keep gaining positions to secure the runner-up spot for his team. Meanwhile, Tsunoda was fighting for the honor of AlphaTauri and at that moment was in 6th. And if the miracle happened, and he could finish in that position, AlphaTauri could finish 7th in the constructors' standings, overtaking Williams. A little further back, we also had Checo Perez, who as usual this season was making his way up from the 9th position. He was doing a good job, gradually advancing on the grid with a chance to aim for the podium. But by this point, the race was quite stable, and it would be on lap 14 that the top 5 would start their respective pit stops. The first of them would be Oscar Piastri, making his stop on that same lap. 1 lap later, Lando Norris and George Russell, who had gotten close on the track, They pitted simultaneously, but McLaren's stop was terrible, and Norris ended up losing position to his compatriot, leaving George Russell on the podium with good chances of defending the runner-up spot and closing in on Charles Leclerc. Later, on lap 16, 17, and 18, Hamilton, Verstappen, and Leclerc would enter the pits for what would be their first pit stops. Before this stop, Hamilton was also trying to make up ground after a poor qualification. He found himself behind Pierre Gasly, and when he tried to overtake, he couldn't avoid hitting the Frenchman's car as the driver ended up blocking on the track. of a slight collision with minor damage to both cars, with Alpine suffering more as it ended up losing performance, while Hamilton only had a small issue with the front wing. After the first round of stops by the leaders, the race entered a long period of stability, where the frontrunners were overtaking those who hadn't pitted, were on a one-stop strategy, or had a different strategy. In the important events during this stable period, Checo was making a comeback by lap 25. He overtook Fernando Alonso to take 6th, and on lap 28 he passed Oscar Piastri to move into 5th. By this point, the podium seemed like a fairly achievable goal. By lap 39, the key players in the race would make their second and final pit stop. Starting with Norris in that lap, subsequently, Russell, Leclerc, Piastri, Alonso and Hamilton would follow suit. On this point of the race, Yuki Tsunoda, with one probability and N99 faith, would decide to stay on the track and make a single pit stop. On the other hand, was suffering from the effects of the Ferrari Clown Fiesta as he started on hard tires, and in his first pit stop, they put on hard tires again. This happening in Ferrari's master plan. The sensible strategy was for Latifi to show up and trigger a safety. It's just unfortunate and regrettable that these geniuses forgot that Latifi was no longer on the track and completely ruined the race for the Spaniard, who simply stayed on the track trying to hold out until that non-existent safety car appeared. Returning to Tsunoda, he was trying to make the strategy hold, but obviously he would gradually fall down the standings. He was overtaken by Lando Norris on lap 42, then Checo Perez, who had extended his pit stop to lap 43, overtook him on lap 44. Thus, little by little, he was falling and ruining AlphaTauri's dream of 7th place in the constructors' standings. Meanwhile, Checo continued to climb because the podium was still very much within reach. On lap 47, it was time to overtake Lando Norris. The Mexican tried to turn 6, went a bit wide, but Lando Norris also closed the gap as if Checo wasn't there. This caused a slight contact between the two. Here, I think 90 of people saw a racing incident, except the FIA, who accused Checo of encroaching on Lando's space and handed him a 5-second penalty for causing a collision that made his podium fight more difficult. Genuinely, a penalty that I can't explain. It was a racing incident that didn't pan out, had no consequences, and we've seen worse maneuvers from other drivers this year. Rocco managed to overtake Lando Norris one lap later without major drama, and now he had to catch Russell, overtake him, and also build a 5-second gap if he wanted at least the third step on the podium in the race. With only 5 laps to go, Checo was able to catch Russell, overtook him on lap 54 to take 3rd place, and with that, he had secured the podium position. But remember, he had to build a 5-second gap. If this happened, the situation was pretty good for Ferrari because Charles would finish in 2nd place, and George Russell would end up relegated to 4th. With that, the runner-up spot would go to Ferrari. However, Checo couldn't make up that time, and with 2 laps to go, the gap had only extended to 2.5 seconds between the two. Therefore, in an attempt to secure the runner-up spot for Ferrari, Charles lets Checo pass so that he can build the 5-second gap to Russell and at least finish in the 3rd position. Fortunately, the strategy, although well thought out, fails because Checo couldn't build that distance, and by the time lap 58 arrived, he couldn't secure those 5 seconds, ending up dropping to 4th place, leaving Charles Leclerc in 2nd and George Russell in 3rd. Here back in the pack, a few laps before this showdown, the AlphaTauri driver from Japan continued to resist with those one-stop strategy tires, but was overtaken by Fernando Alonso, relegated to 8th. At least, with a lot of courage, when Hamilton attacked him on the last lap, he took advantage of a mistake by the Briton and managed to maintain 8th place. Good points for the team, which don't help them for the 7th place in the constructors' standings. But in this race and on this occasion, the truth is that Yuki Tsunoda gave a very good demonstration of his talent, and I believe the race was over at this point. I seen the Red Bull driver once again won the race, and once again Max Verstappen would cross the finish line on lap 58, thus securing the final victory of the year. Her 19th victory of the season for Max Verstappen. And so the dominant year concludes with 19 victories out of 22 available, making it a historic year for him and for Red Bull. a milestone that is unlikely to be broken in the future. And while this is commendable and truly admirable, the truth is that hopefully the next year will bring much more competition and we can enjoy a much more exciting season. Although this in no way diminishes the merit of Max Verstappen or Red Bull for designing the monstrous RB&E team. The rest of the top 10 of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix would finish as follows. Second place for Leclerc, who couldn't help Ferrari secure the runner-up spot. Third position for George Russell in a very good race. Fourth place for Checo Perez with a solid comeback but affected by the penalty. Fifth place for Lando Norris. Sixth position for Oscar Piastri, securing McLaren's fourth place in the constructors' standings. Seventh place for Fernando Alonso, finishing fourth in the drivers' standings. Eighth place for the brave and spirited Yuki Tsunoda. Ninth position for Lewis Hamilton, helping secure the runner-up spot. And closing out the top 10, Lance Stroll, who unfortunately couldn't assist Aston Martin in their fight in the constructors' standings. We already know that Yas Marina is on the calendar because it pays more money than other circuits. They want to ensure being the final round of the championship at all costs. Despite giving us great but often boring races year after year, with few exceptions, this circuit has followed the same trend of uneventful races. Today, I must admit it has been a bit better than the usual average the track tends to offer, but nothing out of the ordinary. The battles were predictable, the periods of stability were long, and except for some interesting fights and the battle between Checo, Leclerc, and Russell in the final laps, I find very little to rescue from this Grand Prix. Honestly, I'll give it a rating of 5 boring. I hope that the off-track show and the beauty of the circuit's architecture were directly proportional to the spectacle it offered on the track, but it's not the case. I can only dream that one day these people run out of money so they stop paying and we return to having the end of the championship at the Brazil circuit. My drivers of the day this time are Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and in the third position, I'll place Yuki Tsunoda. It's a shame the strategy didn't work out. He put heart and soul into trying to secure the 6th position he needed, but unfortunately, he fell short by a couple of places on the grid. My disappointment of the day is the group of strategists for Carlos Sainz. Honestly, at this point, I still don't understand what they did. They were playing for the runner-up spot, and I never understood their plan, which basically boiled down to a Hail Mary, give me a safety car. And all they managed to do was ruin Carlos Sainz's race. I mean, he wasn't exactly in a position to score many points, but he could have battled under better conditions with a different strategy. Ferrari messed up with him, and they ended up paying for it, losing the 2nd place in the constructors' standings. The Mies lie caballeros. With this, we conclude the last summary of the year in this 2023 season. But here is where I ask you, what did you think of this Grand Prix? Did you enjoy the race, or were you disappointed? Who were your drivers of the day, and who were your disappointment drivers? Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. I bid farewell, not without reminding you that, even though the season has ended, we will still be producing content, analyses, stories, and other things to continue enriching this Enter the Pit Lane channel. So don't worry about content. We will keep delivering, at least until the end of December. We'll see if we take a break in January, or if we continue full throttle. I say goodbye, not without thanking you for joining me in these summaries, and we'll see you soon for more content on this, your Enter the Pit Lane channel. Thanks for tuning in, and see you later.